lots of room. He's 40, like a rocket. Look at Jinty go, breaks a tackle. He's 20, he's 10, he's touchdown.
Here's a long run. Oklahoma State gonna do it again, and guess who? Big O to the house.
Milroe gonna run it again, got a lane, kicked in the turbo, Milroe, goodbye, touchdown Bama.
Pump fake, Cook, end zone, caught, touchdown, Luther Burden the third.
Welcome into another preseason podcast hosted by the CFFsite. My name is Joe DeSalvo. I am joined by my co-host, Mike Bainbridge. And Mike, here we are, second show. We touched on this in the quarterback show that we did. That was our first show to really jump off this preseason content as far as, media is concerned, right? And so we're running into the running backs. And here's the thing that everyone needs to know. We've got all the preseason content up on the site now, the preseason fantasy draft guide now in its 11th season. We've got the preseason player projections. Of course, we've got everything ready to rock and roll for the season. We're going to be bringing you all the regular college fantasy football content, weekly player projections. We're going to have weekly waiver wire articles. We're going to have, things. I'll have my news and notes and observations piece every week. You're going to be doing a lot of the DFS content again. Man, for those that have never been, have subscribed or have a membership, an All-American or Heisman membership, you get an invite into the CFFsite Discord. And look, there's some folks out there, I get messages, you get messages all the time. There are some that just say the price of kind of being on the Discord, it's worth its weight in gold too, with all the information that you get maybe throughout the week or on game days. I'll give you the floor for a couple of minutes. Like, speak to the Discord and the value that it brings for the college fantasy football community, and maybe even just the DFS community and those guys playing with the prop bets.
Yeah, I think everybody's familiar with Discord at this time, but it's valuable both in season and off season. Right now, all of our subscribers that have joined, we're chatting it up in the Discord. People are asking questions, submitting polls. Which wide receiver, running back do I keep on my keeper rosters? Just overall college fantasy football talk now in the offseason. Then really, I think it's of value, especially in season where, we get some injury news. Of course, we're updating the projections, updating weekly rankings. But sometimes we all know, Joe, we find out 30 seconds before the game kicks off that, player A is out with a unknown injury, right? Yeah. And that is incredibly helpful to be on our Discord because we are parsing through Twitter and all the avenues to try and find that information for you so you don't miss out on, or you get a 0 in your lineups, you get a 0 in your DFS lineups. For prop betting, it's an incredibly valuable place to be, and we hope that you join us there.
Yeah, look, you made a point that I think it's incredibly important to just underscore, and that is the community. The college fantasy football community really makes our Discord what it is, right? It's like, people from around the country, college fantasy football enthusiasts, just finding information, posted it in there, whether it's in team pages, general news, game day news. As the community finds it, they put it in there, and it's extremely valuable. And I know, for you and yourself and me, we just want to say a big thank you to everyone that comes in, and because they've kind of made the CFF site what it is. It's the college fantasy football community that's kind of made the CFF site and built it into what it's become since 2011. And really, it's just a testament to the college fantasy football community and the loyalty that you guys show through the sport. So we appreciate that. So here we go, Mike. Show number 2, running backs. I think when you look at our list, and I have them both here in front of me, and you look at the site's rankings, there's a lot of similarities in the top 12. And I think just like every year, just like every list with every position, when you get outside of that top 15, there starts to be a little variability in our rankings, right? So we're going to touch on that. We're going to touch on some of the names, some of the guys that we've been targeting, some of the guys we've been avoiding, some of those late round sleepers. And maybe some of those guys that, you feel like you need to handcuff because there could be a 50-50 and you want to make sure that you're getting the right guy. Best balls, of course, it means, taking up 2 roster spots, but in traditional leagues as well, one of those guys might emerge. And look, we said this with quarterbacks. There's just some players that in those handcuff situations, if we had a little bit more clarity, they'd probably be up in the rankings. We're going to get to some of those guys, but let's just start at the top. I mean, look, are we really splitting hairs? I've got Ollie Gordon first. You've got Ashton Genty second. There's no sense of really wasting 15 minutes on trying to debate who's 1, who's 2. I think the consensus is both of those guys are the top 2, right?
Yeah, I would agree. And, we actually, we had a moment here just, within the last couple of weeks where it may not have been that case, right? With Ollie Gordon and the DUI. But now, Mike Gundy comes out yesterday and says that apparently he's driven drunk 1,000 times and that's not a big deal with what Ollie Gordon did. I totally disagree with that, but sounds like Ollie Gordon is not going to miss any games here. So yes, we don't need to waste a ton of time here splitting hairs between the top 2 options. I don't think at this point you can go wrong with either player.
Yeah, and let's just go to the next player on our list, DJ Giddings, right? DJ Giddings is number 3 for both of us. Great system, heavy volume. There's not much not to like about DJ Giddings in that Kansas State offense, right?
Yeah, I mean, system's proven. He's proven, I think, at this point, he provides the size that you look for in a prototypical like workhorse running back. The lone 2 concerns with Giddings would be 1, the turnover along the offensive line, but 1, we trust the coaching staff with Chris Kleiman to kind of fill the voids with those vacated spots. But 2, those guys that are stepping into those starting spots got rotational experience last year, so they know the system, and so you would think hopefully it's a seamless transition there. 2, the addition of Dylan Edwards, sure, from Colorado, 4-star explosive athlete, but he's 170 pounds. I don't see him necessarily taking on a significant rushing role this year. He's an exceptional pass catcher, but I kind of referenced it in a response in a tweet earlier this week. Like, in 2022, the backup that year for Kansas State had around 80 something carries, which is a good amount for a backup. And then Deuce Vaughn had 250 some touches too. So it is absolutely possible in that type of offense for there to be 2 guys, but DJ Giddens getting a heavy workload, that RB1 getting a heavy workload. So really no deterrence there for him.
And look, offensive coordinator Colin Klein's now at Texas A&M as well. But like you said, this is a Chris Kleiman, that the offense is molded with his personality, right? So it's going to look very similar, or should look very similar this year as it did last year. So, a couple of other names in the top 10 that pretty steady in our rankings: Phil Maffa, Clemson; Jaden Ott, California. Either one of those 2 guys, Maffa, obviously, he's kind of got the backfield to himself this year. No Will Shipley, right? I think there's a lot of reasons to like him this year. And Jaden Ott, one of those guys that we know probably going to get a ton of touches in that offense. Yeah,
I think it's the certainty with those 2 guys. You're going to get at least 200 touches. That's the floor. And it makes them safe prospects as running backs in fantasy.
Darius Taylor, a player that you and I both have within our top 7. I think you and I love that system. We love Minnesota. Again, PJ Fleck, anything that, it's kind of, he puts his stamp on the offense. I think for you and I, the only thing that you really worry about long-term is Darius Taylor was banged up last year. Can he stay healthy for 12 games, right?
Banged up last year, banged up in the spring. I mean, that's the lone concern at this point. And it's funny too. We were kind of talking earlier in the offseason about that improved depth. Like that, I don't even know, just kind of reading, preview magazines and articles and such. Like, I don't know that that's going to be a deterrent Darius Taylor's workload. I think it's all about him staying healthy at this point is what's going to determine between him being a top 5 running back and a potential bust.
Let's look at Devin Neal, though, real quick, because Devin Neal is a guy that really took off at the last half of last year. We both have him inside the top 10. Do you think we see more of, obviously we think there's going to be more of what we saw at the end of the tail end last year. Whereas before the tail end of last year, there was more of a split in touches in that Kansas backfield, or at least closer to it. We feel more comfortable this year, Devin Neal, that maybe what we saw at the end of last year will mirror at least the first half of 2024.
Yeah, I think so. I think he's another safe play here. Just a couple things though with him. Yeah, like you alluded to, he was one of the most consistent running backs last year in fantasy. He had the most 20-point fantasy. He had the most games of 20 or more fantasy points among any running backs in college fantasy football last year, which obviously provides a safe floor. They do lose 3 starters along the offensive line and a new offensive coordinator. Jeff Grimes comes over from BYU.
Yep.
Didn't have great results there, but kind of like, their in-state rivals, Kansas State, right? It's a Lance Leipold offense, right? So new name at offensive coordinator, but ultimately we think Leipold's running the show there.
Yep. And look, we spoke about it on the quarterback podcast. That's why we like Seth Hennigan with all the experience coming back at Memphis, the weapons coming back. For you and I, you look at Mario Anderson, we have him nested inside the top 10. Both you and I do plug and play for Blake Watson and what Watson did last year in that offense. We feel like that Mario Anderson is sort of a plug and play, a good plug and play fit into that system. I think you would agree there, right?
Yeah. Tim Cram's the offensive coordinator. He's produced 2 top 5 fantasy running backs in the last 3 years. Obviously Blake Watson last year, and then Rasheen Ali at Marshall back in 2021. So, I mean, you give me that kind of player in, we spoke about it on the quarterback podcast. I obviously think, and you believe as well, this Memphis offense is going to be really good for a G5 offense. So I think Mario Anderson should thrive in that role. Not the pass catcher that Blake Watson was, but I think he caught a 40-yard pass in the first play of the spring game. So he's suited for that role.
One player that I want to mention inside the top 10, you and I released our top 16 overall on Twitter earlier this week. And I did see that there was a comment in there. Joe does not have Omarion Hampton in the top 16 overall. Now, look, we say this sometimes, like you have him at 5. I've got him at 12. Quite honestly, it could be a matter of where I'm drafting on whether or not I get Hampton or not, or whether or not I'm overlooking him. This was he was a discussion piece for us earlier in the spring, and a lot of this really came down for me. And I know we're splitting hairs. You've got him at 5, I've got him at 12. That could be a big difference for a few guys. I was just worried about that North Carolina on a whole. Do we really know? Are they going to be settled in at quarterback? That's a little bit of my concern there with North Carolina. You have Omarion Hampton at 5. I have him at 12. I expressed my concern. What's your counterpoint to that of having him inside your top 5?
That there literally is nobody behind him to steal carries, and he's going to get 30 touches again this season. I mean, look, it could flame out because you mentioned it. The quarterback situation is dicey at best. I think if you're bringing in Jacoby Criswell back in the offseason to kind of bolster that room, probably not in great shape there. So this could go up in flames, this offense. But I think you're guaranteed a floor, because what other option at this point does North Carolina have but Omarion Hampton? Yeah.
Now let's talk about a player that changed names, changed teams, and the quarterback changed too. 2 guys that went from the Pacific Northwest down to Coral Gables, Mike. Damian Martinez, right? Joins Cam Ward. Damian Martinez, a big addition to that Miami offense. Look, probably one of the few players on this list that actually transferred and didn't really hurt his stock in the rankings. I think had he stayed at Oregon State and that coaching staff had never changed, Damian Martinez probably would have been a top 10 running back anyway. We have him just right around that mark this year. Steps into a good situation. And again, Henry Parrish left Miami. Who's going to challenge Martinez for carries? I mean, he seems to be the main guy there, right?
Yeah, it would only be a healthy Mark Fletcher, who was really good the second half of last season as a freshman. But, his status might be a little murky for the beginning of the year. So like you said, who's to challenge him in that backfield? I think we all believe that the Miami offense is going to be really good this year, even though they bought it through NIL. But, they have the pieces to be a really good offense. And I don't think, especially the start of the year, I don't think there's going to be another running back to really challenge Damian Martinez in that backfield. And, he's proven at Oregon State that he can carry the ball 25 times, pretty easily. So,
yeah, absolutely. And look, another school in the state of Oregon. Let's go there, because we spoke about it when we were talking about Dylan Gabriel. Like, we still like Oregon, but they are transitioning to the Big Ten. And we were like, for as much as we like Dylan Gabriel, he's not going to post Bo Nix numbers. Jordan James projected running back 1 for the Ducks, but is he going to have a Bucky Irving type year? I think that's the question. Where we have him ranked 11 and 16 respectively, puts him close to that range. But if he's the legit one and he's going to get most of the work there, we know Noah Whittington does come back. Oregon playing in the Big Ten, but their offense is still going to be pretty darn good. There should be enough touches and some numbers to go James's way to make him a very significant fantasy option this year, right?
Yeah, I mean, Marquise Irving was a legitimate top 20 running back last year with Jordan James as the RB2, and I don't think Noah Whittington is anywhere near as good as Jordan James. I kind of mentioned this on another podcast. I think the really intriguing part of Jordan James was in the spring game where he caught 5 passes on 7 targets. And you got 60 vacated targets with Marquise Irving now graduated. So him showing that he's a pass catcher, stepping into that RB1 role, I think it improves his value immensely.
Yeah, I agree. So one more name I want to touch on before we start skipping around a little bit. And it's just because we got to start with the national champs. We got to start with that Michigan offense. You follow them closely for obvious reasons, right? Donovan Edwards, you have him at 15. I still have him in the top 10. I think Michigan, we both expect are going to be very good, right? What's your reason now with Blake Corum being gone for maybe not including Donovan Edwards in your top 15? Is it, maybe a little bit more, the fact that Mullings could get a few more carries there, have a dual threat and Orgy there at quarterback? What's your thought on Donovan Edwards going into this year?
Yeah, I think it's everything combined, right? You have a running quarterback now in Alex Orgy, who should at least start with the QB1 job there. So he's going to steal some carries potentially in the red zone. Okay. You have the questions of, is Donovan Edwards even that good of a running back, right? I mean, you're beating a dead horse here, but those 2 touchdowns in the national championship against Washington, I mean, he missed the hole on the first one, especially. So, there's questions about his vision. I will say though, that looked very much improved in the spring game. So, and he was not healthy for a good portion of last year too. So there's reasons that he didn't kind of burst out onto the scene last year that, people don't talk about. The other factor is 5 offensive linemen you're losing from last year with one of the best groups in the country. So while Sharon Moore, Michigan, I don't really have any questions about their offensive line recruiting. I think it's going to be a really good top 5, offensive line in the Big Ten again this year. You could expect some regression with losing all 5 starters. So there's a lot of reasons as why you're down on, but Donovan Edwards not reaching Blake Corum status, but he's going to be a valuable fantasy option solely because Michigan's just going to keep the ball on the ground.
So that's the reason. And that's the reason I think I still keep him in the top 10. I think all your points are valid, but when I look back at last year and how much Michigan dominated, I think that domination will not be as dominant this year as they were last year. So there were times where maybe Blake Corum wasn't getting any fourth quarter carries. The potential here is that Edwards may get a few extra carries because there's a chance Michigan is going to be in some closer games this year, more so than they were last year, right? So I think, to your point, there's going to be some pros, there's going to be some cons. The one thing that we're still expecting, Michigan's going to be very good. Donovan Edwards should at least be a safe option, right?
Yes, they're going to be very run heavy, regardless of who the quarterback is.
Now, I wanted to touch on a couple of names, Mike, because I think it's important to go here. One, Let's talk about that Ohio State backfield, right? Like if Quinshon Judkins doesn't leave Ole Miss and goes to Ohio State, arguably he's running back 1, 2, or 3. I don't think there's any debating that, right? He's probably a top 3 running back. I have him at 14. You have him at 25. Chip Kelly, offensive coordinator. Travion Henderson in the backfield. Chip Kelly can share the carries especially if he's got 2 good backs. Let's talk about the backfield there for a second. I'll take it first. I just happen to feel that Judkins is the guy that has proven, I think, even to play through banged up, that he can still give you, because we know at times Chip Kelly will put it in the hand of a guy 5 or 6 consecutive carries. I feel like Judkins is the guy that's going to get the 20 to 22 touches, whereas Henderson, I feel he's more of the 12 to 15. But I could also make a case where I could see where both of them are going to be 50-50. It's really tough. I'm just going with what I've seen and what I know. I feel like Judkins is that guy that Kelly will pound over and over and over. What's your thoughts on this Ohio State backfield with Henderson and Judkins?
Yeah, a couple of things. One, just a little insight. This was our last, I think, not team Ohio State for projections, but this was our last situation that we needed to iron out before we released projections onto the site, because it's important, right? You want to nail down the Ohio State backfield because they're going to be very good.
Yep.
But 2, just kind of the uncertainty, unknown about the situation. Second thing, and you'll find this interesting. So these prop bets, the season-long prop bets, starting to trickle out here now. Both Quinshon and Travion got listed at 650 yards each. So even the betting markets don't necessarily know who's going to be kind of the guy there. I think it's more like our difference in ranking is more philosophical, where you're kind of projecting ahead, right? You think that eventually Quinshon is going to take over the reins. Is that like, RB1, whether, 2/3 probably split there. I'm more of the opinion that Ohio State is going to want to preserve both of them. Not only for the entirety of the season, just kind of do right by them too, right? For their NFL stocks a little bit. I know they probably don't care too much about that, but do right by the player. So I think you're going to see a definite 50-50 split for till November, maybe. And then maybe what you kind of alluded to with Quinshon kind of taking over from there. So
here's what I thought. We've spoken about this. I'm not necessarily sure, Coach. Look, these players are getting paid now. I don't think really they're worried about their NFL stock value, except maybe the players are, right? Like coaches need to win or they're out. Players are getting paid now. You got to ride that horse if you got them. But you and I did talk about this. Ohio State, we even mentioned it on the quarterback podcast. They're all in this year, right? And so I think for Ohio State, what they need is a healthy Judkins and a healthy Henderson to get to the college football playoffs. And then they've got 2 horses that they can ride. I think they're going to try to preserve both of them as best as they can to get to that point. But, and this is something we talk about every year, one injury changes everything in this backfield. One injury to Judkins, one injury to Henderson. All of a sudden you've got a top 10 back, right?
There you go. Could say the same about Texas. Could say the same about Penn State.
Well, it's a good transition because I was going Texas next, because here we are. We don't have a Steve Sarkisian running back inside our top 10. I have Baxter at 13 because I'm going to put my money down at least a little bit on history and Sarkisian and his history of riding his backs. But we've got Jayon Blue. We've got another option there too. So there is a difference in Texas running backs. I have Baxter right now at 13. You have Baxter a little bit lower. You have him at 20. Okay, not that far behind. But it is a Sarkisian backfield, and we don't have anybody ranked in the top 12.
Yeah, I think it just it speaks to the point that, let's give credit to Jayon Blue, because I think, at the pre-spring, I think everybody was kind of on the Cedric Baxter's running back 1, Jayon Blue's running back 2. And that is as murky as it could be right now, because Jayon Blue was the talk of Texas spring practices. So I think there is a close to 50% chance, if not better, that Jayon Blue is actually RB1, and we should have him inside, top 20 versus Cedric Baxter here. So this is again, you want to handcuff the situation regardless of who you're picking first, which you'd have to pick Baxter first because ADP purposes. But this is a situation, in my opinion, where you absolutely have to handcuff the Texas backfield.
Well, this is why I've avoided Baxter in a lot of my drafts, because I feel for the value that if Blue wins that job, you have to go earlier. You have to go early to get Blue. So if you handcuff him, you actually have to use 2 pretty valuable draft picks in your draft in most cases. Because, there might be some that are on that side of the fence of Jayon Blue. They may go get him a little earlier. That's going to force your hand a little bit in that handcuff situation. Now, all of a sudden, if you're getting Baxter in round 3-ish, okay, you've got to get Blue, okay, maybe in round 5 or 6 if somebody else likes him. And now 2 of your top 6 players now are handcuffs.
Yeah. I mean, I think earliest probably I've seen him go is like round 8 or 9. So you can wait a little bit. Yeah. But just you have to handcuff, because we want the Steve Sarkisian running back one. The last time that he hasn't had a top 30 fantasy running back was back in 2016. Speaking of her at collegiate level. So you're going to want to handcuff that backfield, because whoever emerges is going to be valuable.
Yep. Well, let's look at one more player that dropped down considerably, probably since the beginning of spring, RJ Harvey for Central Florida, right? Because Penny Boone was a late addition over there. Earlier in the spring, RJ Harvey, given the volume we were expected to get, top 10 running back for both you and I. But all of a sudden now Penny Boone comes in. We already have KJ Jefferson there, which KJ Jefferson really not a threat, right? I mean, that Gus Malzahn offense, you're going to expect the quarterback is going to get his numbers, right? But Penny Boone coming in certainly hurt the fantasy draft stock of RJ Harvey, right?
Yeah, I was kind of on the fence to start, or at least on the side of like, okay, you can still take RJ Harvey round 4 or 5, and he's still going to be valuable. But just kind of looking back, and I kind of referenced 2022 when they had Isaiah Bowser and RJ Harvey, not necessarily splitting carries, because Isaiah Bowser still got 206 touches, and he had 16 touchdowns that year too, but he only finished as RB 39. So, and that was kind of a 2-to-1 split there. Like we're kind of expecting this year with Harvey and Penny Boone. So that was kind of my reference point there for Bowser in 2022, RB 39, like that you're taking RB 39 in rounds, beyond round 5 at least.
Yep, I agree. So look, Mike, that puts a really good spin inside of a lot of guys. I think there may be questions around in the top 20. As you look at your list, I'm going to throw out a few names at you. Just kind of give me some thoughts here. I mean, Abu Sama for Ohio State, you have him up to 13. Obviously, I think everybody within the college fantasy football realm is hoping that Iowa State and Matt Campbell gets his running back ones going, because we know his history. But it's been a hot minute since we've had a good Iowa State fantasy running back. And, you seem to have a lot more faith in Sama this year than I do. I have him at 27, but you have him at 13. That's a considerable difference in value. What's your thoughts around Sama in that Iowa State offense?
Well, I like what I saw last year, especially late. He had that snow game where he had 200 plus rushing yards against Kansas State. I'm going to go with the experience here. You're bringing back, I believe, all 5 starters along the offensive line here. They haven't graded out well, surprisingly, given they had all starters back last year, and they were still the advanced stats graded them out very poorly again. Hopeful that, bringing back the majority of the group again for another year yields better results there. And I like where the offense is, right? You got a really good tight end, Benjamin Brahmer, and you got 2 really good receivers, and Rocco Becht back at quarterback too. So you're bringing back a large part of that offense. And, kind of what you spoke about too is, Matt Campbell in his prior history hasn't worked out necessarily the last couple of years. But I think we kind of see that this year with Abu Sama.
Yeah, well, look, and thanks for sharing that, because the one player that I want to bring up that I have inside of my top 20 that you don't is Makai Hughes from Tulane. And I know that there's a coaching staff turnover there. Obviously, Willie Fritz goes out to Houston, but one could argue that Tulane has more offensive talent this year around Makai Hughes than they did last year. They obviously go out and get Ty Thompson to transfer from Oregon. They get Mario Williams, bring him in at receiver. They bring in Shaz Preston as well, so he's there. So they've surrounded on the outside. They're gonna, they can't necessarily, defenses cannot necessarily load the box against them. Philosophically, offensively, you've got the coaching staff coming over from Troy. I mean, we know what Kamani Vidal did at Troy as well. He's going to get a lot of touches. Makai Hughes is a player that I really like this year, even though sometimes I shy away from players with the coaching staff changes. I feel that this one just feels like very seamless for Makai Hughes. I really like his potential in that offense this year. What's your thoughts on Makai Hughes, real quick?
Yeah, that's one, maybe I don't want to say oversight, but maybe he might bump up my rankings here just because you spoke on it. Just Joe Craddock, the offensive coordinator, John Sumrall, you saw exactly what they did last year with Kamani Vidal, really the last 2 years, right? I'm looking at 2022, yep. 47% volume share in that Troy backfield. And then last year, Kamani Vidal jumped up to 61% volume share in that backfield. Nobody else was touching the football when Troy decided to run the football. And, they had 50% volume share last year with Makai Hughes as a freshman. I think he's, got the size, got the requisite size, requisite durability. I think the one thing that you're going to look for, and maybe why he's not necessarily in my top 20, which, I might change here in the next couple of weeks, 12 targets. For how much he ran the football, he was not utilized in the passing game. So, if we see some reports that he's improving in that aspect, then he can make a considerable jump.
Well, look, much like me talking about Hughes right there, we talked about before we started recording. Gavin Sawchuk was one for me that I think you might have spoken me into moving up next time I revise my rankings. Right? I mean, I have Sawchuk at 34. You have him at 17. In that Seth Luttrell offense at Oklahoma. There was some discussions between you and I at the spring. I know maybe I had some concerns on whether or not Sawchuk was going to be that clear-cut running back one, but he seems to be like that's going to be the case going into 2024, right?
Yeah, I believe so. I mean, what was it? The last 5-6 games, he had 20 plus touches in each game. So I'm just looking, he had 15 or more fantasy points, 5 of the last 6 games. So he really took over that backfield in the second half of the season. And, maybe they lean on him a little bit more with a sophomore quarterback in Jackson Arnold. And, I don't know. Maybe you saw differently. I don't know, but I didn't see anything on Javonte Barnes this spring, whether he's still injured or whatnot. So I don't know that he's necessarily going to be a factor. So I think Sawchuk has that backfield all to himself at this point in time.
Yeah, it's interesting. And, that's for those that are listening and watching, right? And Mike, how much changes for us between April and the end of May? Man, it's just crazy how much our conversations evolved. And it is really tough at times to get that information, to try to piece together, read the tea leaves, right? We get as much as we can, but man, you just wish we got a little bit more. And sometimes we just have to use our history of the type of nuggets that we pick up and try to piece some of these things together. And I think that's what we do in those type of situations. So, as we get outside the top 25, you start moving into kind of low tier running back 2, running back 3 range, right? So there's still great value there, particularly for leagues that have flex players. Let's go to the next point, because I think when you get away from the top 25, you start getting to who do you want to target? Who do I like in that next tier of players? I'll start off with this one because I know I mentioned this to you just a couple of weeks ago. Dylan Sampson and Corey Kiner for me. I've got at 25, 26. I had those guys into the 30s as earlier in the spring. Cincinnati wasn't very good last year, but they bring back all 5 offensive linemen. We know the system. Small and White are now gone. at Tennessee that makes Sampson the clear running back one, at least so we believe. I just have a feeling he's going to get a little bit more of the majority of carries in that Tennessee backfield, which you and I spoke about. It's going to be very good Josh Heupel offense. And Corey Kiner, I think, is going to get a significant workload. As we mentioned, like surprisingly, was a 1,000-yard rusher last year and should get more work this year. Two guys that I've targeted inside of my top 26. Any guys stand out for you somewhere between the 20-30 range that you want to touch on?
Well, you kind of took two of them. I love Kiner this year. It's still Scott Satterfield offense there at Cincinnati, and we know his history dating back to Appalachian State with running back one. So really like Corey Kiner. Dylan Sampson, that's one where you kind of need to buck the trend a little bit. You look at that depth chart and you got a freshman or redshirt freshman, excuse me, or he might be a sophomore in Cam Seldon behind him. That's not a lot of depth, and he was really impressive. Dylan Sampson was last year. The issue is that the running back one under Heupel, I'm going to rattle off these carries per season, right? Running back one, 137, 157, 140, 149. Like that's kind of the range that you're looking at with the running back one there. So I'm in agreement with you. I love Dylan Sampson. That's one where you don't want to overexert where you draft him, right? You're not going to go into the top 4 rounds to draft him, even if you really like the player. It's you kind of settle into maybe that 6, 7, 8 range for him. Let's see who's somebody.
One thing that I'll add as you think of the player that you want to bring up next. The question is, and here's where my algorithm changes a little bit with bucking the trend. Will Nico tuck it under and run as much as we saw the Hendon Hookers and the Joe Miltons the last couple of years? And if not, there's maybe a few more touches to be had by RB1.
Sure. No, absolutely. It's funny. And this is more, I think in drafts that I've been targeting running backs early. Okay. And there's a lot of, we'll get into this later. There's a lot of late round running backs that I really like too. Once you get to that Corey Kiner range, I'll be honest, there's not a ton of players that I kind of like in this range. So this is where I start to hit on the quarterbacks and the wide receivers. And this is just me personally, right? You get to this range for me, and I'm looking at my rankings, the RJ Harveys. We already spoke on it. Question marks. Ricky Hunt, 1 game wonder. Question marks. Is he that, or is he just another run of the mill running back, right? Cam Cook, star of the spring, doesn't have much regular season experience. Marquez Cooper has been really, really good, but the San Diego State offense might not be that great. Is he going to get 200 plus carries for 4 straight seasons? You never see that. So, philosophically, when I'm drafting, like this is the kind of range that I tend to hit on the other positions.
So, what's interesting is you and I mentioned this to you, I think about a week ago when we were doing some drafts. I said, when we get to this range, for some reason, I skip over everybody I've got between 35 and 50. And I'm targeting Cam Cook and Parker Jenkins of Houston. And I'm targeting Cam Cook because of the recent history of RB1 in that TCU offense. And I'm targeting Parker Jenkins because of the potential of a Willie Fritz running back one. So to your point, I started jumping over all the running backs I had on my list between like 35 and 50. And I was like, well, what the hell am I doing? I should have Cam Cook and Parker Jenkins ranked in the top 30. That's why they're significantly moved up. If you got the preseason fantasy draft guide, and here's the thing. The beauty of it is Mike and I updated all spring, all summer long. Cam Cook and Parker Jenkins were 2 players that I had ranked just outside the top 50, and I seem to be targeting them in most of my drafts. If I like them that much, I'm going to put my money where my mouth is, and I'm going to recommend people get them a little earlier. So I'm on board with you. There's a lot of guys in this range where I've been skipping over. I've been going straight to those guys because there's value for me after the 55-50 range. So I'm with you. So here's the question. Are there any players in that range, 25 to 40, as you look at your list? Is there anyone that you're sort of avoiding? Is it a Nick Singleton because maybe there's a split backfield with Katron Allen? Is there anybody in particular where you're looking at and saying, I'm a little hesitant to go there.
There's a lot of guys in this range, and maybe somebody listening to this would be like, well, if you don't like these guys, maybe you should bump them down in your rankings, right? But and some of this stuff, and I was going to say too, like, we have our rankings. This, once we start hearing reports in fall camp, like maybe this will solidify kind of where we have these guys rank, or maybe we're going to have to jostle them a little bit. So we're still waiting on information, but just a couple of guys like Quentin Cooley. The Liberty schedule is absolute cake, but there's notions that he's going to be in a more split backfield at this point, right? So he's kind of one. I have him in the 35 range, where I'm kind of like, I'm not going to draft him in round 4, where his ADP sits. Ricky Hunt, I alluded to it. Like, he's got one game of sample size. Like, I don't feel like investing in that type of running back, where we think this is not going to be that great of an Ohio offense because of all the pieces that they lost. And he's kind of further down the list. Nathan Carter, I'm a Michigan fan here. I think Michigan State's going to be absolutely terrible this year. And now you add in K-Rod Adams. I don't feel the need, no matter how good that system has been for running backs, I don't feel the need to draft a Nathan Carter.
Yep. But look, here's the thing. We can go there next because, like you mentioned, as we get news, or maybe as spring injury or as fall preseason camp injuries happen, that causes a lot of fluidity on our list. We were talking before we started recording, Marcus Carroll, Missouri, right? Like, seems like a good fit in that offense, but they also went out and got Nate Noel from Appalachian State as well, a former 1,000-yard rusher. So you've got that Carroll Noel situation. You've got Lee Beebe, who ended the year strong at UAB. Good spring, but Isaiah Jacobs is going to be back in the fall. But whoever gets that running back 1 spot, there's value there because, to your point, there's going to be some PPR potential as well. So that's one where you've got to be potential handcuff. You mentioned Michigan State. I mean, we have to mention Wisconsin and Ches Malisi, right? I mean, they go out and they get Tawee Walker from Oklahoma. Malisi's got a history of being injured. We also know that there are going to be 2 backs used in that system. Again, good handcuff situation. If one goes down, you've got extreme value. You've got the Ole Miss situation, right? You've got Utah, Micah Bernard and Jalen Glover. You've got Georgia State right now. They've traditionally been a solid running back 1, but they bring in, I think, 2 or 3 transfers. Not a lot of clarity with there. So Freddie Brock is down on our list. You've got Kavorian Bond, Robert Henry combination at UTSA. Like, there's a lot of those on the board right now that we have to have the pulse of as we get into fall camp, right?
Yeah, and hopefully we get it. These rankings sort themselves out, right? We'll start hearing news about these potential, running back by committees, and somebody starts separating themselves, and then our rankings become solidified. I guess my point being here, this 30 to 50 range, they're going too high in drafts for me to want to invest. Not that I dislike the players, but the value doesn't meet the ranking projection per se.
Yeah, I agree. Anybody outside of that top 50 range, Mike, that you seem to be targeting? You mentioned, hey, this is a good range to skip over, 35 to 50. You mentioned there's some value for you later rounds with some running backs. Anybody in particular, or a couple of names that you're targeting after that 50 mark that you're getting great value on? Or, here's the thing we look for right now, right? This is where the high ceiling potential guys, right? Like, hey, you're 3 running backs in right now. All of a sudden, this is running back maybe 4 or 5 for you, right? Where are you going? Who you're targeting?
The Parker Jenkins, Cam Cooks, that's if you kind of bypass it early, because I've had builds where I go, 4 running backs in the first 5 rounds, right?
Sure. Yeah.
So the Cam Cooks, Parker Jenkins, Dylan Sampson's, obviously. If we're looking beyond, the top 50 rankings, maybe we're getting down to rounds 13, 14, 15 and beyond. Anthony Watkins is somebody I've been drafting a lot from Tulsa. I think he's set for a big workload there. He was really, really good at the second half of last season, and you'd like to see that, that kind of, not progression, but they close the year strong, and you think that it's going to translate to the next year. Drake Clark was somebody who was going undrafted at the start of the offseason back in February. Then you just kind of look at it. It's like, well, who's behind him? Like, he should have that backfield to himself now. I don't think he's going to put up Frank Gore Jr. type numbers, but you give me a solidified RB1 that you can get close to around 20. Like, you'll take that every time. And then one more I got for you. Damon Claiborne, Wake Forest. Typically we hate, right? We hate running backs and that Wake Forest offense, but man, what are you telling me that Hank Bachmeier is going to throw it 30 times a game? No, Damon Claiborne is their best player on offense. While the trends don't suggest that you're going to get a heavy workload out of Claiborne and the RB1 there for Wake Forest, well, they did it the one year with Kenneth Walker. So there's at least a data point for that, that they'll kind of lean towards their best player. Maybe that's Damon Claiborne this year.
Yeah, and so I'll throw out a few names as well. I don't think any of them are going to surprise you because it's names that I've mentioned, but we've spoken about at the top of the show. Byron Brown, our QB1, the plays per game that they average. I think there's going to be a lot of touches there. I think the floor for Naquan Wright is of solid value. Like, for me, solid flex option. I think I'm higher on him than most anybody that I've seen, but I seem to be targeting him in drafts because at my running back 4 or 5, I feel like I've got a really good safe floor with him. Is that a guy that's going to score 16, 17 touchdowns? Probably not, because you have Byron Brown. But I can easily see him getting 8 to maybe even double-digit touchdowns and fall within that 900-yard range. I'll take that out of my running back 4, running back 5 in a flex spot. Davin Booth at Mississippi State. They bring him in from Utah State, so there's not a lot of spring news that came in with Mississippi State. But we're paying attention to Blake Shapen for Mississippi State and the receivers that they brought in. I think Davin Booth is a name to keep an eye on at running back there. And then a couple of long shots down the list. You and I talked about that Louisiana Tech situation with Marquise Crosby. There was a lot of questions last year on what was going on. He really played only 1 snap. They bring in Denario Davenport from Texas State. I think until you get anything concrete that Marquise Crosby is going to return, Davenport you're going to get him at end of drafts basically for free. And I'm the only person the Western Kentucky running back Braden Sloan at Ball State. I'm the only person I know that's drafted him, unless you've been in some other drafts where people are going to get him, but he's not even in the Fantrax player pool. But I just think that Ball State offense offers some potential. He's got dual threat ability. He's the replacement for Marquez Cooper, right? So, just some late flyers for me that I'm targeting at the end of drafts that you can get essentially at this point for free.
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
Anybody else jumps out at you, Mike, in that late round range, or some players that really are in that range that have kind of fallen down for you? Because look, here's one more I'll throw out there. I do like Jaden Thomas at UNLV as well. We talked about there's some questions about what's going to happen at quarterback, but they lose 2 of their top 3 rushers from last year. But Thomas is one of the top 3 from last year, the only one of the top 3 rushers that returns. He's another one that I like, that you get some pretty good value at UNLV. Anybody in that range outside of that you're avoiding?
I
do like Jevin Jackson for UTEP too. So, I mean, I feel like I could keep going with all.
Yeah.
Look, I think this speaks to the point though. You're like, hey, I'm not in love with the 35 through 50 guys, but like there's names that I'm throwing out that's like between my 60 to 90 list that I can get.
Yeah. And it's all about price, right? Because some of those guys at 35 to 50, other people in the industry, other drafters seem to be higher on those players. So the value for me doesn't meet the projection ranking. So yeah, I really like some of these guys that are going rounds 20 and beyond. So in that range, I'm going to start hitting my tight ends, my wide receivers, my quarterbacks. That's just how I've been, and seems like we're of same mind of that.
That was just exactly where I was going. This range, when everybody's going for the running backs 35 to 50, that's where you and I are transitioning, going for the receivers now that are all of a sudden between like 15 and 25.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I agree with you right there. Because look, you even bring out App State, you got Kanye Robertson there. We've got Anderson Castle there too, but that's potential in another high-powered offense as well. So,
yep.
Any avoids? Anything you're avoiding here late it's hard to say avoid late because you're really just not drafting them. But are there any players in this? Well, we'll even go back it up a little further. Any players in that 35 to 50 range or even beyond where you feel like maybe earlier on you were on them, a lot of people were on them, but they feel to be sliding down a little bit?
Yeah, I'll just close with one name, and
Yep.
it's Ishmael Mahdi with Texas State. I don't think I have any shares of his this season. You know, he kind of started in that round 2 range, still kind of gets drafted there. But he's primarily settles in the, the 3rd round, maybe he falls to the 4th. That depth at Texas State, I'm kind of worried about. They brought in the 2 UTEP transfers because I believe one of their coaches is a former position coach over at UTEP, and he's now on the Texas State coaching staff. So, he's got some familiarity with Terrence Burgess and then Deion Hankins, both transferred over to Texas State. I don't know that Mahdi's going to get the same workload that he did last year. So that's kind of I'll leave you with that. That's the player that I haven't touched at all this offseason, despite liking that Texas State offense.
No, I think that's a good one. I think that's a good one to end with. Look, we could probably sit here and do another hour, but I think we probably touched most of the hot button topics. If anyone going to look at our draft day cheat sheets, which is at the end of the preseason fantasy draft guide, I mean, there's a lot that you and I are really in lockstep with. There's some difference of opinion, but I think we've touched most of it there and at least kind of given some clarity on why we're kind of thinking the way that we do. And philosophically speaking, from a draft perspective, in regards to value of when we are and are not kind of getting out of that running back mode in your draft. So,
and as a reminder, we'll keep these fluid, our rankings throughout the offseason, and they'll be up to date and fluctuating right up until week 0.
Yeah, look, the good thing is right there on that landing page when you go get the updated version of the preseason fantasy draft guide, which we're going to be right now, we're updating it about once a week. As we get into preseason camp, those updates are going to be coming probably every 24, 48 hours. Yeah, we're moving stuff around. It's like playing chess at that point. But that's the one great thing of keeping everything online is that we can move some things around and you guys get the updates as we go. So that's going to do it for this podcast in which we focused on the running backs. We've got one more to go. I'm assuming the next one may be a little longer because we're going to address receivers and tight ends, but that's going to do it for this show. So for my partner, Mike Bainbridge, my name's Joe DeSalvo with the CFF site. Till next time, guys.